DavyJones, sick crusher, and we have pocket aces, deadly combination. Let's see what happens. Rigged egg raises the button. We of course 3-bet here with a little bit more than 100 big blinds in stacked depth, and we get called. And the flop comes 6-5-3, which is a flop that is not going to be c-bet that often. So we of course have a lot of overpairs that the button does not have. However, we also have a lot of overcards that do not hit anything. And the button will have a few more hands that connect with this board. So pocket threes, pocket fours, pocket fives, pocket sixes, they will have more in their range than we will have in our 3-betting range. And also suited connectors are going to be more in the button's range than in ours. So we have to find some checks. And whenever we do that, we of course have to not only check with our air hands, but also protect our range with a hand like this. And aces is probably one of the best hands to do that with, because it is not vulnerable to any overcards. Whereas if we had tens or pocket jacks, for example, any queen, any king, any ace would be very bad for us, not only because our opponent might have overcards that hit those, but also if we have jacks and the turn is a king, then it's going to be harder for us to get value. So we'd rather bet those hands on the flop right away, get the money in against smaller pairs right now, and even deny equity against hands that have 6 outs or other good equity that they might realize when we just check. So aces is a good hand to check here, and that is what happens. So DavyJones just goes ahead and checks it on the flop. Now against the stab, we can either check raise, of course, or we can, I think, also check call a lot with this hand. Just again, because aces do not mind slow playing here as much as other overpairs will. And when we check here, we of course need a check calling range with not only hands like ace king that get good outs against this bet, but also with some hands that are traps. So that's what Davy does here. On the 9, he checks again because rigged egg was the aggressor on the previous street, goes for another bet, and here we often see players, at least at lower stakes, which means lower stakes than 10k, so mid stakes and below. If they check called aces on the flop, then this is probably the latest spot where they continue, where they start fast playing it. So against this bet, we often see players check raise, and I understand why, because anything that happens on the river is completely out of our control. If it is a straight completing card, we have either a very hard time making a decision, or we can easily lose out on a lot of value by not stacking an overpair here. So if rigged egg has pocket tens here, or even just a hand like 10-9 that stabbed the flop and now has a pair, if we check raise here, they are going to call almost always. We're going to stack them most of the time, and GG. But if we just check call and the river is pretty much anything almost, those hands will not put as much money in on average compared to us check raising here. However, again, the same principle holds true, that if we want to check call with any hands that are not that great, so again, let's say we have ace king here and we basically bluff catch here with some additional outs, then of course we also need to have some hands that are traps and just crush our opponent's range. because that is something that does not happen that often. And if that is the case, then the button will just have a very easy time bluffing in this line. And having done a lot of MDA and population analysis recently, I can tell you that for the button, this is a very good line to bluff, to say the least. Just because people at most stakes do not do something like this, where they check call flop, check call turn, which is what DavyJones ends up doing here as well. On the river, we then see rig deck jamming, and yeah, DavyJones just snaps it off. We're gonna leave the results out for the end because we want to do some analysis now and be unbiased. So we saw that stacks were, yeah, almost 100 big blinds deep. So let's go with this one. These games were rig free, so we will go with the Chippy V model, and yeah, the button just raises 2.5x, small blind, then 3 bets, and the button calls. Now the stacks in here, we're gonna move this over here. Pot is a little bit smaller. Stack is, let's add a comma. And now we can go ahead and insert the bet sizes here. So Davy did not bet on the flop, so we cannot check whether his sizing that he used actually in game is the best sizing that the solver would use. So we will just go with the automatic one and just see which would be the single best bet size if we only had one. And for imposition, we can have a quick calculation what percentage that is. So yeah, 26%. So let's take this. I think around 20% is a stabbing size that you could almost always use, at least as a rule of thumb. That's what I memorized for myself. So yeah, he check calls. So also automatic, then assigns an automatic sizing for the check raise. On the turn, we can also go with automatic for DavyJones, and this one for imposition will be 22 by 35, so around 63%. So let's just get rid of this, have a small one, a little bit of a bigger one, and then yeah, we can add a pot size here as well. Not too sure if this is used, but we will see. That's what we run the simulation for. And then on the river, we can also go automatic here, and then yeah, not sure if we need all these. Probably it's just gonna be a jam, but why not? Sometimes you get surprised and you learn something new, right? So with that, we can just run the simulation. 6, 5, 3. And we'll see that a pot size is the most preferred size if we only use one, which does make sense because, as I said, there are some hands on this flop that just want to get as much money in right now, which are exactly those hands: tens, jacks, pocket nines as well, queens sometimes. And then as we go up, we already see that kings check more often than they bet, and the aces almost never bet actually. Specifically the ones without a club, they never bet. So the clubs, they can bet a little bit more often, just because if we have a club, our opponent obviously does not have a club, which means they do have more backdoor straight draw, more backdoor flush draws. So anything, an ace of clubs is not able to have a backdoor flush draw. So when we have that, it is more likely that they have an ace of hearts, an ace of diamonds, an ace of spades with the according suit, so that they will have a backdoor flush draw. And if they have a backdoor flush draw, they will of course call that. So when we unblock a backdoor flush draw, we will get called more often, and that's why these ace of clubs combos bet more often than the ones without a club. However, overall, aces just bet very rarely, and we already see that DavyJones was pretty spot on here, actually. And again, the big bet size just leverages the fact that this board is so dynamic, and pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket nines, queens as well, they just get in a pot size bet right away on the flop. And if the board runs out in a way that is not preferable for them, so if an overcard drops, if a straight completing card drops, then of course we can still get bluffed off our hand and it makes our life hard. But that is the way of thinking that we often get. We don't want to get into tough spots because we could get bluffed, and we don't want that. However, it's still, at least in theory, maybe even more likely that our opponent just has a hand like 6x, maybe ace king, and that is just a hand that just goes ahead and checks down some frequency of the time. And when that is the case, then at least we have gotten as much value as possible in on the flop, which is a pot size bet here. And that's why this big bet size is so effective on this type of flop. However, we check, and here we see already that the small size as a stab is preferred. I'm not sure if there are too many flops where a bigger bet size is preferred as a stab. We almost always see a small size. And yeah, if that is 26%, it's probably fine. Whether it's 20%, 25, 26, or 30, probably doesn't make too much of a difference if you play the frequencies remotely right. So here we see that pretty much sets always bet for imposition, two pair as well. Overpairs mostly do, but sometimes mix in some checks as well. So just so we have some value hands in our checking range, probably. Top pairs mix 50-50 basically. And then the same goes for second pairs, third pairs, deuces as well. And then we see that those high cards also sometimes bluff, sometimes don't. Not too easy of a strategy to apply because there's so much mixing. If you know, of course, that all of these hands mix 50-50, then you can remember it. But anytime frequencies are so mixed, it's usually not too easy to come up with that and the reason for that on the spot. And that is the case for pretty much anything that is a high cards hand here. So against the bet, we will have a raising range of 15%. 22% of hands will just go ahead and fold, and those are mostly hands that just have overcards and no backdoor draws. So even a hand like 10-8 suited of hearts, for example, will just be able to check call here, even though outs are not great, but good enough. Even the club combo actually folds less often than it continues, sometimes by check raising. And these check raises will likely not happen as often in practice, not even close. That is my estimation. I haven't looked into that specifically, but I know that the check raising frequency overall for population is lower than this, and I would bet it's more value heavy than this right here. So almost all of these middling to high over pairs check raise 100% of the time. Same principle. They want to get money in on the flop. if not by c-betting, then at least by check raising here, because you get so much value in right here and remove so much hassle at a later spot. But again, same principle holds true for aces as we already explained before. It's not vulnerable to any overcards because there are no overcards for aces, and therefore we can just check call them most of the time. And again, clubs can be a little bit more aggressive because of what we explained earlier, and the other ones just always check call. So GTO play so far from Davy. The 9 on the turn comes and we always check. For imposition, we actually see that a small bet size is used most often, so this usually speaks for a betting range that is a little bit wider, not too polarized, has some hands in there which are medium hands, some weaker hands as well, and that shows in form of hands like pocket fours, 6-7 that bets every time. 9x of course is a pretty decent hand on this flop, but even hands like ace-5 bet more often than they check. So this is a pretty condensed betting range, which consists of a lot of hands. If we want to go with a bigger bet size, then we see that less of those hands would be betting. So 6-7, for example, bets for this sizing very rarely, just because we want to bet a little bit more polarized when we bet bigger, and therefore most hands that are going for this size are 9x, pocket 10s, pocket jacks, sets of course, and then some bluffs like straight draws, flush draws, and even just pure overcards like king jack, king queen, and the offsuit combos as well. So when we see this big bet size, we can probably expect our opponent to be a little bit more polarized, which likely speaks for or prefers us to slow play a little bit more often than against a range that consists of more pairs. Because against a pair, of course, we can get more value by being aggressive, whereas when they are polarized and have more bluffs in their range, relatively, then slow playing makes more sense because we get more value from their bluffs. And let's have a look. Aces actually go for a check call more often than they go for a check raise, which is also very fine. We see 35 to 40% of frequency here. So either play is very fine. And it doesn't actually make too much of a difference whether we have the ace of hearts or not, which I would have thought makes a difference just because we block the flush draw. So I would have thought that maybe we check call the ace of hearts a little bit more often because we when we don't have the ace of hearts and we our opponent can have a flush draw more often, then we would want to deny their equity more often by check raising. However, it might just be the case that those don't bet for this size a lot, which they do. So, well, they also go for smaller sizes sometimes. Yeah, probably doesn't make too much of a difference for imposition whether they have the flush draw or just a straight draw like ace-8 bets pretty much all the time with either combo. Maybe that's the reason, not too sure. In any case, check calling is very much an approved play, and we see that kings, which is a little bit lower, again likes to go for the more aggressive play and always check jam. Again, shows just how different aces and kings are here, just because we cannot lose to a rivered ace here, which might seem not too relevant because it's only 4 cards in the deck if we have kings, but it makes such a big difference that it actually incentivizes kings to always check jam and aces to mostly check call. And what I mentioned before, ace king is still a hand actually that check calls here sometimes, but again, that requires our opponent to bet a lot of hands that are just pure bluffs. These overcards here bet quite often, we can see, whether suited or offsuited, and that is very profitable in game for the button in practice, as I mentioned before. But if that is whether that is actually happening for most opponents, I doubt it. If they are good mid-stakes players, they can definitely manage to do that, but at lower stakes, it's a little bit rarer, I would say. But if you have different experiences, let me know. Always happy to hear your insights as well. The river is a jack. We check range again. And now the button does have only one sizing, which is a jam. And anything that is pocket tens and better always jams. So even though the jack hits, it's not too relevant, apparently, just because we shouldn't be check calling too many jack X here. Probably maybe king jack of hearts, ace jack of hearts, and that's probably it. Let's have a look. Yep, queen jack is also in there sometimes, but other than that, there is no jack X here that are relevant. Jack 9, of course. Okay. So that's why tens is still a good value bet, because we will just have so many more 9x, 6x, 5x, 3x, and probably even some ace king might check call here, in theory. But we will see that in a second. All right, so any top pair can jam, anything that is better than that as well. And anything that is king high and worse will also go ahead and barrel it off here, which is interesting, right? If we got here with king queen, which we do get here quite a lot, according to theory, king 10 and king 8 as well, then we always barrel it off and bluff. Same for queen jack, queen 10, 10 8, and even some ace x hands. So the lowest ones, ace 5, ace 4, and ace 7. Even though these are a lot of hearts, they always bet here, and then ace 8, ace 10 becomes the threshold where we do not bluff here. So ace queen is checking back here, which is likely because we still have some ace kings in our range, ace queen as well. So if we have ace 4 in the button's shoes, we can fold out higher, a lot of higher ace highs, and just win the pot and win a lot of EV. But if we have ace queen as the button, then we could also still win against all of these hands by just checking. So yeah, as the small blind, we should actually check call some ace 10s, ace 10 of hearts, and then some tiny ace king. Yeah, all right. What were we looking at? Okay, yeah, sure. Aces always calls here, of course. And the same goes for any top pair, any jack X that we hit here, any second pair actually. So 9x always check call through. And then third pair are some of the hands that not always call, specifically, or pretty much only these pocket pairs, 7s and 8s. Probably because we block some bluffs. Yup. And yeah, the board pairs, so 6x in this example, they of course block less bluffs because the pair is not bluffing here, and that's why these pocket pairs are always, or not always, but a lot of the time, worse bluff catchers, just because you block so many more bluffs. If, of course, this was a case where in position only ever bet a straight or nothing, which some people might, I mean, there's always sets, but just as an example, if this was a case where it would only depend on whether our opponent had 7-8 or a complete airball, then of course these hands would be better check calls than 7-6, just because we block the nuts. However, in this specific example, that is not the case, and 7s and 8s just block more bluffs than 6-7. And that's also why 5x is a better call than that, because 5x and 3x blocks at least some sets, which are some of the hands in the buttons range that, yeah, they just almost always go for this line. They sometimes check back the flop, I guess, but if they don't do that, they barrel it off every single time. So these hands are actually valuable in some sense. And then, as we said, some ace-x hands just sometimes call here, but if you don't do that, you probably don't miss out on a lot, except if you really think your opponent is over bluffing, which would take would take quite a lot, right? Because we saw that according to GTO, these hands bet quite a lot. So half of the time, more than half of the time, they would stab the flop and then barrel it off quite a lot of the time on the turn. Yeah, almost 80% on the turn is GTO, and then barreling it off on the river in also more than 75% of the time. It's not too easy to overbluff in this spot. So they would have to pretty much overbluff the flop already in order for you to just check call down some ace high hands here in practice. All right, let's have a look at what Rick Deck had here in the spot. King Queen off. And that is exactly one of the hands that would go for a bluff here. King Queen. The hard combo is probably worth a little bit more here just because the 6 is a heart, but I'm not too sure about that. Well, it doesn't make a difference. So the only difference is if we have a club here, then we bet less often just because we block less backdoor flush draws, which will check call more often, and anything else is pretty much going for the same frequency. So this is actually a club, I didn't see that, which is one of the lesser frequent bets here, 75% of checks. Maybe he was over bluffing here, who knows? We don't know the frequency he would go for in this spot, but in any case, DavyJones' play was at least GTO, maybe even higher EV as an exploit if Rick Deck bets this exact combo too often. But yeah, it's not too much of a punt as we see, and pretty much GTO approved if you do it in a I'm missing the word now, and I'm gonna end the video. You know what I want to say. All right, see you in the next one.